Welcome everybody to this, the last of Scifest Africa's themed months for the 2021 season. My name is Mike Bruton and I've been asked to chair this session. I'm not too sure why, because I'm just a retired fisherman, but maybe it's my bow tie that makes me look a little bit scholarly. I'm sure you'll agree that we've had some extremely stimulating webinars and panel discussions over the last few months through the online Scifest. And these sessions have raised awareness and generated debate on a range of important issues related to science and technology in South Africa and in Africa as a whole. On behalf of everyone who's participated, I'd like to congratulate Friede Mshwati and his team for the superb way in which they've organized these online events. This panel discussion's theme is Stimulating Innovation in Africa, a Pathway to Sustainable Development. As you know, innovation has a positive impact that cuts across all levels of society, and we will explore the kinds of policies and strategies that are vital to stimulate the culture of innovation in Africa. I'd like to ask all Zoom participants to use the Q&A function to ask questions, and Facebook users, please comment on the video stream that you're watching. Now, we're very privileged to have three distinguished panelists with us today. Firstly, Professor Tshilidzi Marwala, who's a Deputy Chair of the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, a very important role. Second, Dr. Otlhapile Dinakenyane, who's a lecturer and researcher at the Botswana International University of Science and Technology, BIUST, which I have fond memories of visiting in 2018 when I participated in their science festival. And our third panelist is Toby Shapshak, the editor-in-chief and publisher of Stuff magazine. I've read a great deal of what Toby has written, but oddly enough, the only time we've ever met has been at the National Arts Festival, where he was running the creativity program. Now, before I ask the panelists to introduce themselves and respond to some questions, I'd like to make a few introductory comments. Over the past few years, I've been doing intensive research on innovation in South Africa and in Africa, not only on the inventions, innovations, and inventors, but also on what I call the spirit of innovation in Africa. That is, what distinguishes African innovation and what drives African innovators to be so productive, despite the often harsh circumstances under which they have to live and work. I found during my research and in conversation and correspondence with African innovators that we are punching well above our weight in the innovation arena, and that there's every possibility that this 21st century will be Africa's century if we realize our full potential. There's several reasons why I hold this optimistic point of view. Firstly, the demographic dividend. The median age in Africa is 18 years, compared to 31 years in Asia and South America, 33 in Australia, 35 in the USA, and 42 in Europe. This means that in comparison with other continents, Africa has a huge cohort of young people to drive its innovation revolution. Secondly, research has revealed that creativity is often sparked in highly constrained, resource-strapped environments, as are found widely in Africa. Thirdly, I believe our young people in Africa are tough and do not have an attitude of entitlement. In the West, many young people believe that if they work hard enough, they will succeed. When they fail, they are racked with self-doubt. But this is not a problem in Africa, where many, if not most, young people, especially girls, have experienced failure, as well as discrimination and inequality during their short lives, and learned to cope with it. In fact, failing often and quickly and getting up and starting again is a far more beneficial lesson in life than nearly always succeeding. I think we also in Africa have an incomparable can-do attitude. Fifthly, the technology stepladder from low to ultra-high technology that characterizes innovation in Africa allows our innovators to use the stepladder to advance their careers. They can start small and simple and become more and more sophisticated. And then finally, I believe our rich natural resources, both mineral and biological, and the diversity of cultures in Africa open up many opportunities for us compared to other continents. The diversity of cultures means that many different points of view, including points of view from traditional knowledge, can be brought to bear in innovation. So these are the sorts of qualities that we need to nurture and to optimize if we are to promote innovation in Africa. We also need to recognize that African innovation expresses itself in a different way to that in what I call the overdeveloped world. And I'm going to make comparisons with music. In Africa, our innovation is more akin to a role-swapping improvisational jazz band that has a high level of alertness to new opportunities, riffs, and co-create something new, rather than to a formal Western symphony orchestra that is conducted according to a strict formula, as tends to happen in the first world. More than anything, African innovation is characterized by its exuberance and spontaneity, its flouting of the rules, its homegrown agenda, and its ability to develop at all levels simultaneously. If we play to our strengths, Africa will be the bright continent in the 21st century. To me, triumph over adversity by a resilient, resourceful people at all levels of society is the spirit of African innovation, and I believe it is something worth celebrating. I would now like to ask each panelist to briefly introduce herself or himself and to comment on how we should stimulate innovation, especially in relation to sustainable development. Let's start with Professor Marwala, please.
Thank you very much, Mike, and all the people who have come today to listen to us. My name is Tshilidzi Marwala. I am the Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University of Johannesburg. I'm actually an engineer. I started off as a mechanical engineer, but I did a PhD at Cambridge in artificial intelligence. And I think I am an inventor and an innovator. So my interests span across various disciplines, from engineering, application of technology to engineering to medicine and social sciences. So I'm quite passionate about innovation, in particular to do with matters of sustainable development. Just here at the University of Johannesburg, we decided that due to the unreliability of energy supply by Eskom, we should actually start producing our own electricity. And as I speak now, 15% of our power actually is generated from solar panel. And obviously, University of Johannesburg has been involved in innovation around thin film solar panels. These are some of the examples of innovations that are happening in Africa. But why have these innovations not translated into large-scale industries in Africa? I think part of the reason is because our markets are too fragmented. And for many of these technologies, in order to recoup your investment, you actually have to sell millions of these. One of the example is the automotive industry. That was never really domestic one, indigenous one, that has never really grown in Africa because the South African market is simply not large enough. The second problem is actually the lack of risk appetite of our venture capitalists. One of the inventions that I and my colleagues, David Rubin, Brian Viktorovich, and various other people have discovered was something called an artificial larynx. We ultimately had to sell that to an American company because simply we do not have venture capitalists who are willing to take a risk on the production of this device that we have come up with. And secondly, because probably we do not have the market large enough to stimulate these venture capitalists to invest. So what we see in Silicon Valley is not happening at any scale in South Africa. So thank you very much.
Right, thank you. Those were some very interesting introductory comments, and we'll get back to some of them. I'd now like to ask Dr. Dinakenyane to say a few introductory words. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. And my name is Dr. Dinakenyane, and I am a computer science lecturer in the University of, in the Botswana International University of Science and Technology, commonly known as BIUST. And I am very much interested in seeing industry working with universities, and my passion is really around seeing SMEs working with universities, because I so much believe that if the SMEs worked with universities, we can see a better survival rate of these SMEs than them existing independently, because they can benefit a lot from universities. And that's one of the things that we can explore as a continent or a region, to see some of the innovators who are running the SMEs working with universities. And then the other thing that I believe in is that we can stimulate innovation by cultivating the spirit of this innovative spirit from grassroots level. So at universities, we can have incubators that can help our students, so that the projects that they make don't just end at university, but are launched into the market so that they can make a difference for us. And then the other thing that I think we can do is basically have incentives towards that. We always have these awards where we're giving people that are involved in sports, and we appreciate what they do. But when it comes to innovators and all, we don't celebrate them as much. We don't put them on the platform as much. If we did, maybe we'd see more people getting towards or being motivated to actually be involved in innovation, hence seeing our continent going far. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much. Those are some interesting comments. I very much agree with you that our inventors don't get enough exposure. If they got the same exposure as our sports people or musicians or actors, that would be wonderful. Right, then thirdly, let's ask Toby to make some introductory comments.
Thanks, Mike. And I was remembering the first time we met. It was at Scifest, and you asked me if anyone was writing a book about innovation in Africa, and I said I'm writing one. But there's this brilliant book I just read because called "That's a Great Idea," and then my friend Jane Burnett said, "That's Mike. He wrote it." So I suppose in a way it kind of defines the serendipitous nature of how things work, and it's particularly true in Africa, as the Prof and the Doc have said. There's a different spirit, and you summed it up really nicely. There's a different spirit, and what you see is, because there is no other way to do something, you find a way. It's innovation out of necessity, frugal innovation. In South Africa, we always called it a boer maak 'n plan, you know, and that's the kind of thing that you see across the continent, because people want a better life. They want to do different things, and they are able to see through the internet all of the things that are possible. And I've seen such amazing companies come out of Africa, and it's not just a great product or a great website. It's got to be a good business model, you know, and it's got to prove or be sustainable. It can't survive on goodwill. And there are so many examples of that. And I think the one that stands out for me, that's arguably getting the most PR coverage, is a company started originally in Nigeria but has offices in Kenya and Uganda, called Andela. And they don't make a product or a thing. They hire young, brilliant Africans, train them to be computer programmers, and they work for a variety of companies around the world, Viacom, GitHub, that kind of thing. So there's an unbelievable amount of energy and interest and willingness and keenness, as you say, Mike, the population dividend, the young people. And in fact, the medium age of 18. And, you know, part of the reason that the coronavirus hasn't hit South Africa and Africa quite as hard is because our population is such a young population. But what it has hit is economically. We haven't had the numbers, but we haven't had the economic way around that. And I think what we're seeing in terms of the way people innovate and come up with good ideas, and PESA is one of those ideas, Mkopa, Brick, Ushahidi, these are just from Kenya, of good ideas that people have come up with. And I think it just shows you that when you have no other option but to find a solution yourself, people come up with amazing solutions. And to my mind, the solutions that we're coming up with in Africa are actually the same problems the world has everywhere: lack of access to electricity, lack of income for low to, you know, poor countries, all of the things that we've discovered, that the power of a mobile device and the power of the internet and the combination of all of those can make possible. And look at the great examples. Half of all mobile money services in the world are in Africa. And we have, you know, while the world has been fiddling around with alternatives to the credit card, we've just completely come up with it. And even before mobile money, there was just a wonderful, simple solution, which is, if you want to send someone value or money, you can send them the 12 digits of airtime. You buy a certain amount of airtime, you SMS that person the code, and then they have the value. That was just using plain old SMS. So like you, Mike, I'm extremely passionate about what we can do because we have nothing, and how we can work with it. And the examples abound. And thank you for including me on such a prestigious panel.
Well, thanks very much, Toby. Some very relevant and interesting comments. Yeah, what amazed me in writing my recent book, which is called Harambee, The Spirit of Innovation in Africa, is that the extraordinary range of innovation that one finds. And this range is illustrated by, for instance, in northern Botswana, they were having problems with their cattle being eaten by lions. And they weren't allowed to shoot the lions because they were in a game reserve. So they had to come up with a sort of non-destructive solution. And they painted eyes on the rumps of their cows. And this reduced predation by lions by something like 80%.
Isn't that amazing?
Eyes on the rumps of their cows. And in Zambia, they deterring elephants from raiding their maize fields by putting beehives around the maize fields, because elephants are terrified of bees. And then at the other end of the extreme is in Kenya, this internet in the sky that's been developed from floating balloons that came from California, equipped with solar panels and GPSs, so they're in geostationary orbit, high up in the sky, not tethered at all. And they are providing internet access in the rugged mountainous regions of Kenya. So it's just spectacular, you know, what is being done. All right, let me move over to the questions and start with Professor Marwala. Now, you have a very important role in promoting the fourth industrial revolution in South Africa, but I'd like to ask you, do you think that it is a useful concept? I know that it was introduced by a very respectable economist, Dr. Klaus Schwab, the originator of the World Economic Forum, but I think he's wrong to call it the fourth industrial revolution, as there's very little that's industrial about it. At best, it's post-industrial, at worst, it's anti-industrial. And I believe that the current revolution we're in, which should be called, you know, the first digital revolution or the first information revolution, is going to help us redress many of the wrongs that were caused by those first three industrial revolutions. What's your comment on that? You need to unmute yourself, please, and if you could start again.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too stuck on the semantics of it. Klaus calls it the fourth industrial revolution. The Japanese thinkers call it Industry 5.0. But it is quite evident that there is a new form of industrialization that is actually emerging as a result of the confluence of various technologies such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, 3D printing, and so on and so forth. And it is changing the face of industrial production. I will just give you an example, 3D printing. If you look at the previous industrial revolution, the first and the second, what we would do when you are manufacturing something, you will have a block of metal, and then you will chip it into some form of a shape, and we call that machining. Almost the same way that the great painter and sculptor Da Vinci was basically making, and Michelangelo were making their art. So now you can be able to print things without necessarily having to machine them. Of course, that has all sorts of implications. It means that now you don't have to have large, huge factories. It means that localized factories are going to become much more of a norm in this era in which we are living in. And the other thing is putting intelligence into machines, because automation is very old. It's not even an era, it is not from the era of our times. But what is happening now is that we are embedding intelligence in automation. And the production, we might actually still be producing the same goods and services, but the way in which you're producing them, the number of people you use to produce them, the impact of that on capital formation, actually, I think warrants to be called a different industrial revolution. In fact, there is a thesis that as a result of these developments, now you are having what they call the artificial intelligence superpowers. Two of them have emerged now, and these are China and the United States. And now coming back to our commission here, I think the terminology of the fourth industrial revolution has actually been a very useful concept of mobilizing our people around certain things that needs to be done. Things that needs to be done about human capacity development. Things that needs to be done about technology. Things that need to be done about reindustrialization, because you can't reindustrialize without investing in these technologies. Things that needs to be done around data, the data economy, which is becoming a much more significant economy in the world, and in South Africa we are still lagging behind. Things that need to be done about the relevant infrastructure, whether it is connectivity and so on and so forth. Things that need to be done about incentives. You need to incentivize people to invest into these technologies. And ultimately, things that need to be done at a policy level. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. I think it's more than an exercise in semantics, looking at it, naming it properly, because this revolution signifies, in my opinion, a major change of mindset in our approach as to what industry is. Because the fuel of this post-industrial revolution is not steam or coal, gas or oil or nuclear power, but data and information. And the symbol of this revolution is not smoke billowing from chimneys, but the interconnected community of human brains and things that have created a situation where we're more interlinked and potentially collaborative than ever before. So to me, it's not more of the same. It's a totally different mindset and a new way of approaching things, and hopefully an approach that isn't as elitist as the first three industrial revolutions, because it allows young people from all different cultures, as long as they're digitally competent, to participate. So, you know, to me, it's a totally new revolution, in which we've created a multi-brained, multi-generational superorganism, a kind of collective genius that has a potential more than in any previous era to co-create solutions to some of the biggest problems that the world faces. All right, I'd like to skip around a little bit with the questions so that all the panelists have an opportunity to respond. So let me direct a question to Dr. Dinakenyane. Perhaps you could outline to us what Botswana is doing to stimulate innovation, especially in relation to sustainable living.
Thank you very much. Botswana is doing a lot in terms of stimulating innovation. We have a place here in Botswana called Botswana Innovation Hub that really helps people that have ideas. It's more like an incubation space for people that have got ideas, so that you have an idea, you approach them, and then they would assess your idea with you, and then they would look for investors that can actually invest towards developing your idea. And then when your idea is ready, then it goes to the marketplace. I think that's a very good thing, because it helps a lot of people that might not know what to do. Because sometimes you can have an idea and you wouldn't know what to do next, where you can get funding, who's going to help you to promote your product, even if you were to do it. So that helps a lot. And we also have some funding agency called SEDA that actually helps citizens. They fund their ideas so that they can be able to develop them into something, or into products and services that can actually be consumed by the society. And we also have another agency called LEA that helps as well in terms of registering your company if you do have one, and even educating people in what is involved around having an idea, and what is involved in actually seeing your idea into the market. And we also have the IP policy that protects these ideas, something that is really important, because sometimes, I think sometime back in our country, we did not have that. And that sometimes could be a scary thing, because you would have an idea and then you share it with somebody, or you even develop it, but it's not protected in any way. And people sometimes, instead of seeing their ideas through, they would rather keep them, because the ideas would be stolen if there's nothing that is protecting your idea. I think for now, I'll stop there with the discussion about how Botswana is stimulating innovation. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So obviously Botswana is intervening at all levels of the innovation process, and that is very, very important. Would you agree that African countries like Botswana can actually teach the rest of the world on how we can live more sustainably?
Yes, we can, especially that given our background, or maybe not even background, the status quo, we don't have a lot, but we are surviving without a lot. And that on its own is a lesson that can be shared with other people, because imagine what we can do if we had the resources that other people have. We do a lot right now, even without having them. So yeah, I believe so.
I think what we've turned that lack of resources into a positive, and it's driving our innovation and causing first world countries, what I call the overdeveloped countries, to really take note on what we're doing. All right, let me direct a question to Toby. I agree with you that you made the point of the importance of investors, venture capitalists, and presumably you also mean angel investors.
Yes, I do, Mike. And I suppose one of the biggest problems for entrepreneurs and people starting out is that they can't get the money that they need. And that really is a problem. Why are there so many startups in Silicon Valley? Because you can't swing a dead cell phone battery. without hitting a VC. It was kind of like Kenya 10 years ago when you know, the first ideas of this mobile revolution and this frugal innovation began to bubble up. And in many ways, people have really good ideas, but they can't implement them because they don't have money. And I'm not talking on the kind of industrial scale that Prof Marwala is talking about. I'm talking at a much smaller, lower scale, that if you have a good idea for a website or a service, it's very difficult to grow that, to build that. Why? Because one of the biggest things that you need to do is marketing. And marketing is by its very nature expensive. You know, at the height of the .com or the .bomb, as they called it, most of these big tech firms were spending most of their money on marketing. Now it's the other way around. It's easy to get a presence online. It's a very difficult thing to get a meaningful, authentic social media presence. I really do hope this failed concept of influencers hopefully goes away, because I mean, apart from it being difficult, what you really want is a more authentic example of people doing things. And they're great examples. You know, William Kamkwamba, of course, is the greatest example of an African entrepreneur. If you haven't caught it, his movie is captured in his life story is captured in a movie called The Boy Who Captured the Wind, on Netflix. It's a really great story about how he just solved his own problem. And it's, you know, he was the guy who built the windmill out of used bicycle parts. And that kind of typifies how people solve the problem. We're not talking about, you know, how can I make a, you know, meaningful decrease in my company's bottom line in our Southeast Asia operation. We're talking about people thinking, how can I get electricity in my house? How can I get clean water in my village? How can I get a job that pays me enough money so that I can put my kids through school? How do I, you know, what do I do in terms of COVID? I don't have any savings. These are the kind of real life, real things that people are facing every day on the ground, as it were, in the streets. And that's kind of the things that we're starting to see, or the kinds of innovations we see. Really fantastic stuff. And just in general, I think we're seeing a real solar rollout and a revolution. It's very small scale. It's here, it's there. It's not being run by any of the major countries or companies. It's being run by people who are just tired of not having electricity. They don't care why. They don't know what the problems are. They don't want to know who got which tender and stole what from the government taxpayers. They just want electricity. And what do? They go and solve it themselves. And a company like Mkopa is a brilliant example of this. They worked out what people would spend a year on paraffin or illuminating fluid or heating fluid. And then it's about $200. And then they priced the Mkopa solar units. It's got a base that's got the battery and the brains and a little cell phone in it, a panel on the roof and a couple of lights and a chargeable radio. I still listen to the radio on this great little Mkopa radio. All of it rechargeable, and you pay it off at the same amount that you would if you were Kenyan buying paraffin or illuminating fluid on your way home from work at 53 Kenyan shillings, and that's about 3 US cents. So what they did was not only solve a problem, but solve it in a way that people didn't have to go into debt. They put down a deposit, but they carried on with the same behavior that they had done all the time. And what made that possible? M-Pesa made that possible. Mobile money made that possible. So what you start to see, Mike, is layers of innovation on top of other layers. First came the mobile phone, then came the networks, then came very fast, cheap broadband, then came M-Pesa, then came Mkopa, then came all the other innovations on top of it. And that's really what differs here then. And I love this phrase of yours, the overdeveloped world, because it really captures that. I mean, if you are sitting in an ivory tower trying to work out how to solve the problem, all you can see is what you have in your ivory tower. If you are living on the ground and you have a real problem with no water, no electricity, your solution is going to work for what you have. It's going to be cheap and it's going to be hardy and effective. And everybody else in the same circumstance can replicate that innovation for their own lives.
Okay, let me get the other panelists in. Professor Marwala, Dr. Dinakenyane, do you have any comments on the funding of innovations and helping our innovators take their products and services to the market?
No, thank you very much. Now, I think one of the biggest disappointment about certainly South Africa is the lack of funding. Firstly, our financial institutions tend to be risk averse, especially when it comes to these new innovations, which are obviously quite risky if you think about it. How many versions of Facebooks were there? I still remember MySpace and many others. And they ultimately were all failures, but one of them actually thrived. So that is one of the disappointment. We do have institutions that were designed specifically to deal with this particular matter. For example, in South Africa, we have the IDC, the Industrial Development Corporation. Of course, it was designed during the period of building big mills in Van der Bijl Park, Eskom, and so on and so forth. I think they should be involved in innovation, especially at in the technologies that are emerging now. The Department of Science and Technology have established an institution called the Technology Innovation Agency. It was supposed to do that. It was supposed to have a much higher risk appetite than the IDC and than the banks. But there are very few innovative ideas that were absolutely taken to the market. One sad story about South Africa is the electric car that was fully designed here and won awards. I think it won an award in Europe. The Joule, I don't know whether Mike, you can still remember it. It was absolutely small, and it was it could drive. I actually saw quite a number of prototypes. Why did it go defunct in 2012? Because of lack of funding. In fact, the figure that was put to the Department of Science and Technology was 9 billion rands, of course, in the money of 2012. That was not available, and it obviously disappeared. And now we're talking about electric cars, and they've become much, much more viable today. Where would we be if we had the risk appetite and were willing to put the money, whether it was from the IDC or the Technology Innovation Agency today? I'm sure we would have been much, much far. Thank you.
I think you've made some very good point. The lithium-ion battery and why that wasn't taken to the market in South Africa is another issue. Dr. Dinakenyane, do you have any comments on funding of innovations?
Yeah, I do. Thank you very much. For me, as I mentioned before, in Botswana, at least we are trying. I cannot say that we have a lot of funding, but at least there are some strides trying to assist in that regard. But then the other thing that I like promoting is to work with what you have at the moment. I think there are a lot of grants that are available that are, some of them are even international, that are aimed towards helping researchers. And you'd find that a lot of innovations come from research. Now we can maximize on what is available at the moment and not just look at the problem that we have, because the problem is there. Yes, there's lack of funding, but let's work with what we have and maximize on applying for these grants and then see what comes out of them, and possibly from there, because with funding, I think a lot of times people are scared of the risks that are associated with the innovation, because people are wondering if at all the innovation is going to be successful. And if I'm going to invest in you, then I wouldn't want to just invest to lose. I want to make something out of that. So maybe if we maximized in the research part, because then the results maybe might somewhat give us an idea of how this thing is going to survive, it would help. So my plea would be to encourage my fellow researchers, those who have access to such funds or grants, to apply more for them, and it doesn't even have to be within Botswana because you are in Botswana. Some of these funds, the grants that are given by UN and stuff like that. Let's look out for these and apply for these so that we can be able to at least see our ideas to a certain stage where now I can be able to come with it and motivate it because I have the results and stuff like that. That might give you peace as an investor to invest towards my innovation. Those are the comments I have. Thank you.
So I think we're all agreed that risk-averse investors are one of the biggest constraints to the development of innovation in South Africa and in Africa. But I'd like to ask each of the three panelists in one sentence, tell me, why do you think that the most successful entrepreneur and inventor in the world who was born in South Africa has been so successful? And I'm referring, of course, to Elon Musk. Let's start with Toby. What explains Elon's success?
Well, I mean, he comes from Pretoria, where my mother was born. So I can speak authoritatively, and we're roughly the same age. I remember going to Pretoria as a youngster, and I'm quite sure he was motivated by making the world a better place. But I think what's quite remarkable about him is his imagination. He's an unashamed geek, isn't he? He names the barges that the SpaceX planes land on after characters in Raymond E. Feist, not Raymond E. Feist, Ian M. Banks' books. Fantastic. And he's used this imagination to think big and to do it. And I think more than anything else, it's perhaps not so much his South African nature, although we will always claim that, because it does have an enormous risk, an appetite for risk, don't we, as a country, our history of what we've done. So in startup terms, we have an enormous innovator appetite for risk. We are resilient, we're grafters, we're hard workers. That kind of attitude is instilled in you at an early age. You don't pick that up in the years of college. You are that kind of person by the time you get to California. That's my claim for saying it's nurture and nature. And I think more than anything else, it was that he worked in the startup space. It's very different to any other form of VC or investment. You have to put a lot of money down and spend a lot of years building something. If it's building software, building a business, or doing something, Jeff Bezos, there was no such thing. It's been argued that Amazon's great virtue is not that it's made e-commerce easier, but that it took a pain point, something that was very difficult to do, an enormous cost center, which was logistics, and turned that into a way to make vast amounts of profit. Elon Musk came with the kind of same attitude as he had when he started X.com and bought PayPal, and they have deep pockets and a deep attitude for risk, and they spend money and they have to wait years before there's a return on that investment. And I think that's what you need, because you're going to build a spaceship company and you're going to build an electric car company. Those are big projects that need not only chutzpah to do, but also resilience to keep toughing it out. And I'd like to think that resilience is very South African.
I think you've put your finger on it. His imagination is just unbelievable, and his recognition of past achievements, the fact that he's named his electric car after Tesla.
Lovely.
Who was, much neglected compared with Edison, but he's really one of the heroes of innovation. Professor Marwala, your comment on Elon Musk?
I mean, Elon Musk is actually the same age as me, and he matriculated at the same time as I did. And by the way, I never saw him at the National Science Week. We used to write National Science Olympiad, and it was one of the winners, which basically tells you that sometimes the people who are shining in metric results are too much of conformists. They conform too much to convention. Not to say that people should not excel, but I think thinking outside the box questioning is actually quite important. I actually attribute his success to more than him coming from Pretoria. I think he comes from a very exploring family. When I was reading about his family background, they were going to the Karoo and camping for months, for example, exposing, especially at a younger age, people to different ways of doing things, different ways in which we can be able to tackle life becomes very, very important. And I think what is even more impressive is that the first time he sold his software was when he was 12 years old, still in South Africa. I went and looked at the game that he designed when he was 12 years old. You can find it on the internet. It's actually quite a sophisticated tool, even for our university students. And I think him going straight to North America, because North America, there's something about North America that makes it special, especially in terms of risk-taking, in terms of multidisciplinary thinking, and it explains quite a great deal that when you go to big technological hubs in Europe, such as Germany, there is no German version of Facebook or Twitter and so on and so forth. And the reason for that is that the educational experience is too narrow. They teach mechanical engineers very, very well, and they know a lot about mechanical engineering. But when you go to North America, and I was an undergraduate student in North America, the educational, and Elon Musk was an undergraduate student in North America. The education is much more multidisciplinary. When I was studying engineering, I was expected to take 12 semesters of human and social sciences. Mark Zuckerberg was a major in psychology and computer science at Harvard. In South Africa, you will not find some of these majoring in computer science, also majoring in a humanity subject such as psychology. And of course, for you to go and form a social network company, you have to understand both technology and society. So multidisciplinary thinking and multidisciplinary experience probably explains his success.
Yeah, thank you. That point's very well made. So creating a nurturing environment for your ideas is obviously very important. Dr. Dinakenyane, your take on why Elon Musk has been so successful? And I'd just like to remind everyone that in January, the BBC announced that Elon Musk is now the richest person in the world, although he was overtaken again in late February. And interestingly, the richest person in the UK is also an inventor, Dyson. So investors don't need to be afraid of innovation. It's a great money churner. Dr. Dinakenyane?
Thank you very much. My comment is going to be short. I think I agree with Toby about the imagination and also the resilience, because that's one thing that as Africans we boast about, and we should boast about actually. And it takes us a long way, because without resilience, you cannot be able to stay long and face the challenges and still stay on course. So I think I would accredit that more to the resilience and also acknowledge the imagination. Yes, his imagination. Thank you.
Absolutely. Those are the two qualities that every entrepreneur and innovator needs. All right, let's go back to the general questions. Toby, I get the impression that many of the inventions that are made in the Northern Hemisphere are gadgets that marginally improve the life of the rich, quality of life of the rich and famous, but really don't add anything globally to solving global problems. Do you think we're more likely to come up with solutions in Africa for big global problems than they are in the first world?
Not just more likely, but we're busy doing it. There are numerous examples. M-Cope is just one of combining, buying yourself a solar setup with a pay-as-you-go mobile technology. There are lots of good examples of doing that kind of thing. A company like Brick, for instance, is the largest provider of free public Wi-Fi in Africa. Why? Because that's the basics. If you want to be on the information highway, you have to get a car, you have to find a car as, let's say, your phone, and you have to find an on-ramp onto the highway, and that's what BRIC provides. When you live in an ivory tower, you see ivory tower problems. The New York Times summed this up so great, Prof, and they said, what Silicon Valley started doing is solving the kinds of problems that basically happen to young men when they leave home, that their mother used to do for them: the shopping, the washing of their clothes, the kind of household maintenance that they've never discovered. And of course, these things don't work. There was this big push for this great juice thing called Juicera. I don't know if anyone remembers it. It was a $700 machine, and the juice came in a bag, and it took 2 minutes for the juicera to squeeze the juice into a glass and give you this beautiful fresh cup of glass. The only thing is, the same bag, it took you a minute to squeeze it with your hands like that, and you got exactly the same product. So what are the problems that people are solving? Well, they're solving the problems they see. What are we solving in Africa? The problems that we have: no power, no electricity, no access to running water, roads that are filled with potholes, work for youngsters. We need to find jobs for those young kids. We don't realize, most people, because we have no exposure to it, that if you are a young man in, say, Nigeria, whose job prospects are driving a motorbike. In Kenya, they're called piki-pikis. People drive them. It's not very popular in South Africa, but it is throughout West and Central and East Africa, where you'll catch a minibus taxi, and then for the last mile, as it were, you'll get onto a piki-piki, and they'll take you there. And these kids are in hospital all the time with broken limbs. So what happens? They get approached by drug smugglers or people doing something nefarious. Why do they do that? Because they can make money. At the end of the day, people need to solve real problems to put food on the table or get electricity. There's really brilliant projects with farmers, like subsistence farmers on the ground, not very tech savvy, but very financially savvy and literate. And they are finding clever ways to introduce farmers to people who will buy their crops, that do away with the middlemen. MasterCard has a wonderful project running on this. And that's the kinds of things that I think we see out of it. So you solve the problems that you have in life. In Africa, we solve the same problems the rest of the emerging market has. No toilets, no internet, no power, no source of income. Those are the things we need to solve. If you give people a job and a sense of pride and a sense of being able to give back to their community, watch how quickly they do, and watch how they thrive and the people around them thrive. I often get asked the difference between entrepreneurs and young innovators in Africa as opposed to Silicon Valley or Europe or Asia and the other places I've gone to speak at. And I say the one thing about anywhere where people come from a poor background is the first thing they want to do is go back and buy their parents a house or their mother a car. There's a sense of giving back to your community, and that, I think, is very powerful. And that's what makes us, right? That makes us. We look after the people around us. That's the great thing. You really
identified an important characteristic: giving back. I'd like to take one of the questions, and this question is from Isaac Newton. It's from Monica Newton of the National Arts Festival in Makhanda. And Monica has asked, what role can science festivals play in promoting innovation? And perhaps I can start with Dr. Dinakenyane. What role can science festivals play in promoting innovation?
I think what they can do is maybe in the discussions that come next. Unfortunately, I don't know what has been planned, but we can rope in investors so that they can make themselves known, or we advertise somehow so that people can know where to find investors that can actually fund their innovations. Not only that, unfortunately, right now we're going through the COVID season, so I cannot talk about a situation where you have something like a show, if you like, or where people can actually showcase the innovations that they have, and you have a mixture of innovators coming in the same room with investors, and then innovators can share their ideas and or share information about whatever innovation they have there, and the investors can then maybe take it from there and choose what innovation to fund from that setup. Hoping that we will find a way to cope with COVID such that we can have a physical meeting. Yeah, I think that will be my comment towards that.
Right, well, thank you, Monica. There are three ways: showcasing their inventions, finding investors, and sharing their ideas. And I'd like to add to that the opportunity for young people to meet experienced and successful innovators. Let's get the ideas from Professor Marwala. What role do you think science can play in promoting innovation?
Well, I think the first thing that is quite important in our society is obviously scientific literacy. If we are going to agree that science is a very, very strong driver of innovation, then we must have a scientifically and technologically literate society. Illiteracy of today, of the innovative era, is not just the inability to read or write, it's the inability to understand science and technology. And as a South African, one of the things that really worries me is actually the level of scientific illiteracy. And I'll give you an example. There was a question that I posed on Twitter. It was three people who said three statements. One was Newton. He said time was relative. The other one was Albert Einstein. He said, no, Newton said time was fixed. Albert Einstein said time was relative. And then Karl Marx said, time depends on who is selling the watch. And I say, who was correct? I'm not lying. 90% of the people said Karl Marx was right. It is scary. It tells you the level of scientific illiteracy in our society. And without scientific literacy in our society, we are not going to be innovative. And I think science festivals are supposed to be drivers of scientific literacy.
All right, Monica, there's a fourth one, scientific literacy. And Dr. Marwala, how important within that scientific literacy is the skill of coding?
Well, I did a PhD in artificial intelligence. I think we should get our basic right. And our schooling system must come with the correct skills. And which are the skills that I think are quite essential? I think there are three core skills that we need to get out of our educational system. The first one, the ability to communicate, especially in English, because the syntax of coding is in English, so very, very important. The second one is the ability to think logically. And thinking logically, we don't really have a logic course in our schooling system. So how do you embed logical thinking into our system? And then the third one is actually the ability to understand basic mathematics. I think if you have all those skills well, then coding becomes easy. So I am not an advocate of rushing to coding for the sake of coding. If you are going to coding in order to embed logical thinking skills to primary school students, then I would agree with that. So I think let's concentrate on the core skills rather than rushing into coding.
Okay, there's another one then, embedding logical thinking and improving basic mathematical skills. Dr. Dinakenyane, can you comment on the role of Science Festival?
I think I already have. You're muted.
My apologies. I realize that. Okay, I'd like to now go on to the general discussion and put some points to you and get your response on what is holding back innovation in Africa. The first one is a lack of opportunity for African innovators to meet one another and exchange ideas. The second one is a need for an Africa-wide online innovation hub. And then to ask whether organizations such as the African Union and SADC, as well as our political leaders and leading industrialists, do enough to stimulate innovation. I think in South Africa at the government level, there's a great deal of stimulation of innovation. We were one of the few countries in the world to have a Department of Science and Technology. And now we've gone even better than that. We have a Department of Science and Innovation with a lot of promotion of innovation. But I wonder whether our political leaders and our industrialists are really playing their role. Let's start with Toby.
Prof, I mean, I think there's, you know, your question about the EU and SADC just bounced out to me, and I suppose I used to be angry about it, but now as you get older, you become more pragmatic, I suppose. And SADC and the AU have got much bigger problems. They've got refugees, they've got economic disasters, they've got countries where dictators have let the economy fall to pieces. Housing, clean water. These are pressing, immediate issues that you know, that seem to overtake the necessity to build the right environment for this kind of innovative spirit. And increasingly, as you know, as Prof Marwala mentioned, that's just not the focus, unfortunately, and there isn't the industrialization necessary. You know, for countries to uplift themselves out of or to uplift themselves generally, there are certain requirements that you need. You need a certain level of economic activity. You need a certain amount of electricity that you always have available so that you can run the tills in your supermarkets. I think that a lot of countries get locked into solving the bigger pictures, the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You need a place to stay, clean water, sewerage, drinking water, food. Obviously, these are also things that are easier to siphon off of if there are tenderpreneurs involved, or you know, people always find a way to steal things. So you know, is it the lack of ideas for people to share? Look, there may not be one online marketplace, but there are innovation hubs, iHubs, co-working spaces, iHub in Nairobi, CC Hub in Nigeria, which bought the iHub. These are great places. You go to just about any city, any major city in Africa, and there's a place that you can go and find the other geeks and the other startup people, and you can be with that kind of crowd. And that's heartening to me. Sure, there's a lot of the structural stuff that's not there, and certainly the infrastructural stuff, and by a long shot, the lack of finances. I have a small startup myself in the news business. It's very hard to find the stuff, but you know, as we know, it's a process, unfortunately, that really does bring, that does cull the projects that won't work and leaves the projects that are more likely to succeed to be there. I mean, COVID-19 has been a terrible culling of the herd for businesses that were too leveraged in debt or didn't have enough resources or weren't able to pivot. In my industry, in technology, in publishing, in journalism, it's been a horror show. 800 people lost their jobs, 3 major magazine groups shut down their businesses, 15 titles closed last year. So the companies that are left behind, those are the tough ones. They're the ones that are going to keep going, and it's up to big business to see that and to get involved in supporting them. You know, big business can do a lot with its cash. You know, take a look at Hollard Insurance. This is a fantastic example. They spend a fortune on big billboards, TV adverts, radio adverts. So what have they done? They've gone to their customers, their smaller customers, and they've said, you know what, we will give you our billboards will say, look, we're being nice and we're giving them to you, which they are, but they are still getting the marketing exposure, and yet they're using their very substantial budgets to help other firms do that. That's fantastic. That's the kind of stuff I'd like to see more of, you know. Put it back into the community as opposed to spend the advertising with Google and Facebook. Rather put it into local communities, local media, local shops.
Mike, you muted.
So it seems to me that the COVID pandemic has in many ways promoted innovation and also led to more philanthropic ideas and greater emphasis on the triple bottom line by companies. But let's go to Professor Marwala. What is your take on those points that I raised that are holding back innovation? You know, not enough contact, need for an online innovation hub continent-wide, and more involvement by political leaders and industrialists.
Absolutely. I mean, I firmly believe that we need to have the economies of scale, and innovation requires the economies of scale, and the African Union can play a big part in creating the economies of scale. I think the Africa Free Trade Agreement that has just been ushered in the last few weeks is actually quite is a step in the right direction, you know, because it will make sure that we have bigger markets. But of course, treaties are treaties, and practices are practices. You know, if we are not connected, if it is still difficult for me to transport goods from South Africa to Congo Brazzaville, then it does not help what treaty you have put into place. You know. Then the second thing is about our politicians. One of the biggest problems that I have with our politicians in South Africa is that we don't have innovators and scientists and technologists in our parliaments and in our cabinet. One of the shocking observations that I have made is that we actually have never had an engineer, maybe perhaps with the exception of Trevor Manuel, who was trained as a technician in civil engineering. We have never really had an engineer in our cabinet. No wonder we have problems with our energy and many other factors. When China was modernizing, Deng Xiaoping was ushering the modern China. He said our leaders must actually be technologically advanced so that they can be able to take everybody else to the innovation era. Of course, we know that the current president of China is a chemical engineer. He succeeded an electrical engineer who succeeded a civil engineer. We need to have that. Yes, I agree with you. The Department of Science and Technology has done fantastic work. But my only criticism that I will put on the Department of Science and Technology is that they've done the science very well, by the way. The SKA, excellent idea. The Meerkat, excellent ideas. The technological part has always been a missing part. And part of the reason was because the DGs who have been in charge of that department have all been scientists, not engineers. And this actually tells you that when you put a strategy, have people who have a fair understanding of whatever strategy you have put. Otherwise, you are not going to succeed. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you've made a very good point. Just for interest, when I once addressed the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee for Science and Technology, the chairman of that committee was Wally Serote, the poet. I have a great admiration for him, but you know, he didn't come from a scientific or engineering background. And in terms of members of our cabinet with a scientific background, I would think we could mention Derek Hanekom, an ex-minister of science and technology, because he did have a scientific background. All right, let's go to Dr. Dinakenyane. Do you have any comments on this final point?
Yeah, I have a few comments. I think in terms of political leaders, they are trying, but I think more can be done, because when you develop policies, I think it's very vital that you include the people that are implicated in the policy, or at least the people that are going to be involved in implementing the policy. Now, we can have policy developers who will be developing a policy elsewhere about something that they are not really informed about. It talks again to what Prof was saying, that we don't have leaders that are maybe technically sound or that are trained in this engineering, science, and technology. But if we have leaders like that, because maybe we might not have a choice since they're being voted in because of the democracy, then they can involve people that are in these fields when they're developing policies. Talk to universities, talk to some companies that are doing things within engineering, or in electrical engineering, if at all you're going to be doing something that is along that line. Have experts in your team when you're developing a policy, because at the end of the day, that policy is going to be implemented by them. So if it's something, that's the reason why we have policies that are drafted and strategies that are drafted and nothing is ever done about them. They're drafted or they're done and then they're shelved, because people that are actually key were not involved in the beginning. And the other thing that I want to appeal to politicians about is the initial thought that I had in the beginning, where I was saying, let's celebrate innovators like we are celebrating sports, like we're celebrating music. Why can't we have the president giving awards to innovators? Because people, one way or the other than just getting money out of their innovation, I think recognition does matter to a lot of people. And maybe with that, we might find a lot of people being motivated or stimulated to actually get into innovation. And then in terms of communication, I think as individuals, we don't necessarily need an online platform that is shared across countries per se, in my opinion. But we need to understand as individual innovators that we are no longer I'm no longer just a citizen of Botswana. My market is not just limited to Botswana. We are now world citizens. So whatever you do, whatever you think of developing, don't limit yourself to the population of maybe the country that you're in. I mean, like my population or our population in Botswana is like what, 2 million. So if you're going to be just focusing around that, then you might not get more energy or more, you might feel like whatever it is that you're doing, your market is very small, instead of seeing yourself as doing this in a world platform instead of at a country level. And then we also need to maximize using our social media. We use social media for other things, but sometimes we don't use it to actually share ideas where possible, whereas we could actually maximize on using it rather than letting it estranging us from the environment and not benefiting us in any way. So we can maximize on using it to actually solve problems, to actually share ideas with other people, instead of just the fact that I'm having coffee at a place. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Those are some very valuable points. So if we can't have scientists as our leading politicians, at least we appeal to those politicians to have scientific advisors. We also appeal to them to recognize innovators in the same way that they recognize our heroes in music and sport, and that we should be world citizens who think big and maximize the use of social media. Right, well, unfortunately, we've used up our time and more. I have many more questions, and I think we could have gone on for another hour without boring our audience. There's several other points I'd hope to make, but we will now need to wrap it up. And I'd like to very sincerely thank our panel for their very valuable contributions. And I think this discussion shows that when you get together a group of people with different experience, different qualifications, they really come up with a variety of very, very innovative ideas. And I think we've achieved that in our session today. So I'd really like to thank our three panelists very, very much for their participation. And hopefully we can remain in contact with one another and keep exchanging ideas.
I've got a great idea, Mike.
Yeah.
Stuff Magazine rewards the best apps developed in the country. I'm going to start an innovation award, and I'm going to get you and Prof Marwala and the doc involved, and you'll be the judges, and we will, if we can't give them money, we'll give them recognition, and we will award the amazing people who are doing amazing things. And what a glorious bunch of judges. So consider self-deputized.
Well, thank you. That's
let's
a great initiative, and I hope the other panelists agree to be judges.
Great. Let's do it. Let's use the power of the media to shine a light on the people that deserve it.
Fantastic outcome. All right. Well, I'd also like to thank Freddie, Nikki, Ryan, Obisa, and Steph, who work behind the scenes to make these webinars possible. And to remind all our listeners that this isn't the last webinar in this Innovation Month. There are in fact 3 more to come. 2 of them are being presented by NASA, and the third one is about the role of the Expo for Young Scientists in promoting innovation. So thank you once again to everybody, to our 3 panelists, all the participants on Zoom and Facebook, and to Scifest for this opportunity. So goodbye and see you next time. Can keep innovating. Thank you.